Darren Muring. I'm a civil engineer with the City of Dubuque, and I'm standing on the banks of the B Branch Creek, which is one phase of the multi-phase B Branch Watershed Flood Mitigation Project. The main primary goal of that effort or project is to address urban flooding, flash flooding, mitigate the damage that's been occurring in these neighborhoods for over a decade, if not longer. So what you're looking at is mainly the B Branch Creek today, and before our project started it was a buried sewer system, and our project essentially replaced that, rebuilt the creek and put back a floodplain to go with it. How we did that was through natural plantings, through prairie grass, through again, just having a daylighted creek where the water is exposed to the sunlight. The water is oxygenated by waterfalls. They might look just like a water feature, but they actually help aerate the water, mix the water, and again, just to improve overall water quality. In terms of flood mitigation, the whole reason was to provide more room for the water to pass through this part of our community. In the past, it would either pond in streets to depths of 3-4 feet. It would go into, then it flood up to houses and go into basements, flood basements. And a lot of times when it was during these severe thunderstorms, so that people might be, at least in 1999, people were actually in their basement due to a tornado warning, and then they've got water coming in their basement. So just very unsafe conditions. And so that was the main thrust. So as I said, we replaced this buried storm sewer that had been put in the ground, around the turn of the 20th century. And so over 100 years it functioned that way, but many times it would become overwhelmed and flood. So we increased the capacity, allowed the place for the water to go other than inside of basements and flooding streets. Stepping back a little bit, even just doing a watershed type approach, you get much more benefits from the actual improvements. So when we do things up in the watershed, we have other phases of the project where we had detention basins. So that actually will provide improvements all along from between where that detention basin is built, maybe 3 miles to the west. So between here and there, we've got benefits. We've got less erosion in the creeks. We've got less flash flooding in those creeks, less property damage. We also have better water quality because you have less sediment in the water. So one of the things of doing a watershed approach and doing things out in the watershed, instead of just addressing the flood-prone area itself, you get benefits that way. The other benefits of doing the creek the way we did is you get the kind of the benefits to the environment, the habitat that's created, versus if we were just to bury this or put more buried storm sewers, we would not get those benefits. And I think the other thing the community gets from this type of project, a daylighting project, to have open water, is just people are near water, and there's direct correlations between happiness and well-being when people are exposed to water. It's part of who we are. I think a large percentage of our body is water. I don't know if it's 80 to 90%. So we are water. So to be exposed to it and to be around it is a very good thing for humans and citizens. And then the other aspect of creating this linear greenway, we call it, it's actually, we consider it a park now. In addition to its flood mitigation benefits, it's actually a park for the community to utilize. And so many of the homes in these neighborhoods are very old, and with Dubuque having a lot of bluffs and steep terrain, houses were really put right on top of each other when they were developed, and so there's very little green space. There's very little yards for individual homes. So a park like this can also provide that green space, place for children to play and stretch their legs and run, in a safe environment versus, say, doing it in a street. So I think just having a community space as well is another benefit of a project like this. Well, some of the challenges we have, and especially in an urban setting like this, is when you go to place a creek, there really isn't just wide open spaces for us to drop one in. Trying to figure out where the best place to have put this creek back through these neighborhoods was a real challenge. And one of the things we did is we engaged with the actual citizens of this area. We had a citizen advisory committee that actually, decided on what criteria was important to where we were to put this creek on the actual alignment. For example, one of their number one priority was preserve neighborhood resources. So, for example, don't demolish the only grocery store we have in our neighborhood. Another high priority was, making sure we didn't acquire too many properties, preserve properties. That was one of the biggest fears with a lot of, the citizens is we've got to put this through here. We've got to acquire, 50 to 100 properties. And so as we're going through the process, you've got this natural, understandable fear of, well, is that me? Am I going to be forced to move? I can't afford to move. What does that mean for me? And so that was a big challenge, is working through that process with the community. And so the Citizen Advisory Committee really helped do that, because ultimately they decided which homes and properties we would need to purchase. One of the lessons, we did follow the Uniform Relocation Act right away, which is kind of a federal guideline. And even though we were doing it with local money, it just made sense for us to do it. And it's, uniform treatment of people is always a good thing. And so there's very good benefits that go with that really helped people transition from where they were living before into their new home. So that was a challenge. And then you'll notice as you look up and down this parkway, we have a lot of retaining walls. That's a function of trying to make the footprint, somewhat as small as we could to provide the conveyance we need for stormwater, but also prevent us from having to go back farther away and buy more houses and properties. So that's a real challenge. The biggest lesson is just to have the community involved. As a planner or a scientist or an engineer, I can sit in my cubicle and I can try to design what I think would be the best solution, based on engineering or scientific or planning reasons. But you're really doing this for citizens within the community, and nobody knows better than they do what's important in their neighborhoods, what makes their neighborhood unique, what makes it that they want to live in that neighborhood, and we want to honor that and make sure that what we do, because ultimately what we're trying to do is make their home a more livable place. So we can't create something that's going to make it less so. So you really have to take the citizens, engage with them and get their feedback. And that was one of the things we did as part of the design process. That even when we went into design, we had multiple meetings where we had invited this public in and, asked them, what are your fears of the project? What are your hopes for the project? What are things that your neighborhood could use? So, the lack of off-street parking was a big issue. And so like we built a parking lot on 22nd Street and Prince, and it's really a trailhead parking, but we actually made it a little larger because we recognized that the need for off-street parking. The other thing that was voiced was there's a railroad tracks that cut through the community, and it'd be nice when we put our project through if there's a way for them to be able to get from one side of the railroad tracks to the other. And with the HUD-funded, partially funded B Branch Creek Railroad Culverts project that's nearing completion this fall, that'll be a reality. There's actually going to be a bike path that's going to go underneath the railroad tracks. We're able to convert the dual box culverts that are about 10 by 10 box culverts, two of them that have been in place since about 1930. We're able to utilize them as both flood control and as a way to get pedestrians from one side of the railroad tracks to the other. So just another example of listening to the public and what they want, incorporating that into our project, so that what the end product is something that they can fully take advantage of. So the community response has evolved. Initially, there was, as I spoke of, understandably, there was some fear of the unknown of what this project would really, involve. When we first started talking about having a waterway through their neighborhood, the thought was, well, is this just going to be an above-ground sewer? So, and of course, that wasn't what we had in mind as the city planners or engineers. It just took a while to work through that process, and that's why we engaged with the public to, like I mentioned, get their input on the actual alignment, where we're going to put it, but then actually what is the look and feel of the waterway, the creek and green space, and so that they were heavily involved. So because we went through that process, the public largely embraces this project. The number of people who come down here in the evening, either to just a bike or to walk their dog, or and the other part I think that it really provides that's, this project is kind of situated in what I would say is our more affordable housing, our older housing stock. So you've got a lot of younger families, blue collar type homes, if you will. Over the years, these served the pack company, which was a huge industry for our community. And of course, as the community grew, it's gone out to the west end. Well, this project and this green space, this park, now is a place where those people will come to the same place, and they will meet each other and interact with each other, where before this project, those types of opportunities really didn't exist. And so, there are all kinds of people, school children who get off out of school in the afternoon and come down and play around the water and skip rocks and do what kids do around water, to the an older person who, like my age, who might just come down for a walk or even bike through our project. You can get on the trail that I'm standing on now and bike north 26 miles to Dyersville, Iowa, and in a few months we'll be able to bike the other way and go underneath the railroad tracks and down to the river. So a lot of opportunities and a lot of benefits that the citizens are really enjoying these days. The project itself is made up of 3 different distinct phases. The lower or downstream section is closer to the river. It's more in a commercial type setting, and so the look and feel of that creek area is more natural, more prairie grass, more open water. It's a much wider creek, and the reason for that is just because that fit that setting. And then of course the section we're in now, or that I'm in now, is more right in the middle of these neighborhoods, and so you've got people who are houses that are literally right next door, and so therefore this has a different look and feel. It's a more manicured, more usable area for the residents. The third key piece is the railroad culverts project, which was funded with the directly with HUD funding. That is what is going to allow the stormwater to really flow through. When we were done with the upper section and the lower section, we had flood protection of the 75-year rainstorm. When we're done with the railroad culvert project, that'll be increased to a 500-year level of protection. So huge advancement in the ability for our community to withstand flash flooding. So we can walk along and look at some of the unique features of the creek project. So the feature behind me right here is a spillway. It serves multiple functions. So the nature of this watershed is that we're in a flatter area, the cooler valley area of our community, and I'm sure at one time it used to just be a backwater of the Mississippi. And then as you go to the west, you go up into some pretty steep bluffs, steep terrain, and so the water will rush off of that pretty fast, and it'll actually run down Kaufman Avenue, 22nd Street, right to this area. And so this spillway is to allow for that water to flow down into the creek area without eroding away or ripping up the creek embankment. The reason why there's water coming out now is that in the storm sewer there, we have a pump that'll draw water out of the storm sewer, and it'll discharge it up at the top of the feature here, and then it'll flow down. So it's almost like a treatment of the storm water itself. And then it also, as it spills in, it helps aerate, mix the creek. One of the fears when we talked about creating this creek was, would it be stagnant water and unpleasant in that regard. So we're now in the downstream section of the B Branch Creek, or the lower B Branch as we referred to it as. Again, it's got much more open water. It's got prairie grass planted all along on both sides, pollinator habitat. We've also incorporated several floating islands into the project design, again for water quality treatment. for aesthetics and for habitat. And right behind me is really the key to the flood mitigation component of this project. It's the tunneled culverts. You see the 6 round openings behind me. Those were installed through using micro tunneling. So they were tunneled under the railroad tracks while the trains were still passing over the top. So it's quite a feat to be able to do that. Now that we have those open, we've increased our flood mitigation up to a 500-year event that we have protection from. And as I mentioned, the 2 culvert or openings to the right of those are actually going to be used for both flood control under really rare or extreme rainstorms, but also pedestrians will be able to use those to cross from the upper upstream B Branch Creek to the lower downstream B Branch Creek. So one of the features that's behind me here is you can just see it above the water line. There's a long gray colored metal structure. That's the gate that we can raise or lower to adjust and maintain the water level in the upper section of the B Branch Creek. When the Mississippi River comes up to certain stages, we want to prevent that water from backing all the way up into the upstream section. Because it might be there for several weeks, it could kill the vegetation. By having the gate prevent that, we increase the flood protection, increase storage, maximize the efficiency of the storm sewer systems up there. So, I mean that's really our project. The citizens of Dubuque should be really proud of what we've been able to accomplish here. The size and scope of this project should be well beyond the scope of a city our size, but through the partnerships we fostered at the local, state, and federal levels, and the financial assistance we've been able to obtain was what made this a reality. And I guess the biggest thing, we talk about flood mitigation, but what does that really mean? It's really peace of mind. Before our project, you had people who, if there was a prediction of a rainstorm, they'd go to bed at night worrying, are they going to wake up and have to deal with flooded basement again? And so that's really what this project, in addition to just its beauty and the amenity of it all, of this additional space that they can come and experience, it's really the peace of mind that when we do have these flash floods, that they can be a thing of the past, that rainstorms will just be, it'll be more of a prelude to a good night's sleep with the rain, pattering on the roof versus a prelude to a nightmare the morning after.